everyone. Thank you for being here on a very warm Sunday evening. So a year ago, Jo was just starting her third or fourth week as leader and planning her shadow cabinet. We're now here with the two candidates hoping to replace her. I think it's quite safe to say quite a lot has happened in the last year, so I think this will be quite different. Just get going. As a heads up, there will be some trigger warnings for racism and potentially homophobia or transphobia. I will let you know before those questions are asked. Please feel free to turn off your volume, leave, come back if you feel that those questions are uncomfortable. Standards rules apply. I'm sure you're both very used to this by now. So you'll have 3 minutes opening remarks and 2 minutes to answer each of the questions. We will do a quick fire round at the end, which will drop the time down just to 30 seconds, so just quick sort of 1-sentence answers. I do have a timer open, so we'll be quite strict on the time because I want to just make sure all the questions are asked and answered. So the order's already been decided by some very dedicated HQ staff spending a day flipping a coin on Zoom. So it will be Layla first and then Ed. Any questions before we start? No? Awesome.
Good.
Layla, you have 3 minutes.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for chairing. Thank you everyone for joining us on this balmy evening. I became a teacher because I believe in building things that will outlive me. And I spent my life being amazed at the difference that young people make at every level of society. And now more than ever, we have to be a party that delivers for you. I've listened to over 300 local parties this year and done 2 Q&As with YL. And these have informed my central campaign pillars of education, the environment, and the economy. And in those sessions, not once have I heard a young person asking for anything that frankly wasn't afforded to generations before. You want security in the roof over your head, in what you do for a living, for the future of the planet that we live on. But far too often, you aren't being heard. I want to be your leader because I do hear you. I want to be your leader because I've got the media cut through to take the tabloids to task when they sneer at you for being woke. I want to be your leader because I'm determined to pull down each and every ladder that's been hoisted up on your generation. I struggled with depression at uni. I know on a personal level how tough it can be. And that's why under my leadership, we will fight to restore funding to slashed services so that everyone can get the mental health support that they need. We'll focus on lifelong learning so that you have the freedom to change your career throughout your life. We'll build the social and affordable homes that you need to drag that housing ladder back down to earth. And we won't settle for carbon neutral. We'll build a carbon negative society that leaves you and your children a planet that's safe to live on. And we'll introduce a universal basic income so that we can meaningfully tackle the poverty that still shamefully blights society. And we'll crack down on unpaid internships that perpetuate privilege and give our young carers the support that they need. You've told us what you want at conference. You've written the prose. And as your leader, I'll turn it into the poetry that we need to win. But at 6% in the polls, it makes winning all the harder. Our party is crying out for change. You are the future, the Liberal Democrats. I want to invest in you now. If we're going to win, then we need to give our activists the tools that they need to deliver on our vision and our communities again. This means training activists in how to win. It means having a leader who listens from the grassroots up. Entrust me with the leadership of our party, and I will be your champion in the party, in the press, and in Parliament. So let's move forward together, and let's build a party and a society that we can all be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ed?
Friends, thank you for coming tonight. When we look to the future, though, it's challenging. The worst recession for perhaps 300 years, COVID, Brexit, the climate emergency. I bring a liberal vision and years of experience to support young people facing this challenging future. Take the economy and climate. My green economy recovery plan invests in green homes, green transport, green energy, with a green jobs guarantee for young people. I can deliver this green vision because I've experienced doing it before. I fought the Tories on climate and won. In government, I more than trebled the UK's renewable power. We made Britain the world leader in offshore wind. Be proud, our party has Britain's best climate change record. But a future greener economy must also be fairer. From working on a universal basic income as Paddy Ashdown's economics advisor, to devising policies like a penny on income tax for education, I've always backed progressive ideas. In building a fairer society post-COVID, let's be the voice of carers. The UK has 10 million carers, 3 times as many people who voted Lib Dem in December. As a carer for much of my life, I empathise with other carers. I started as a young carer. Dad died when I was 4, Mum became terminally ill when I was 12, so I nursed her for 3 years till she died. Now Emily and I care for our severely disabled son John, who needs 24/7 care. And I have constituents with mental health problems, with physical disabilities, all needing better care. Let's champion carers, young carers and old. Let's champion all those needing care, whether their challenges are mental or physical. In the general election review, you see our party's many challenges. The conclusion, there are no quick fixes. With the sharpest criticism, people don't know what voting Liberal Democrat means. My vision answers that: a greener, fairer, more caring country. Friends, we can win. I get quality media cut through, like after I forced a commitment from Boris Johnson for an independent inquiry into COVID. Above all, I'm an experienced campaigner. I'm the only MP in our party's history to win without being a target seat. I've won 6 out of 7 elections I fought in a seat we have never, ever held before. While times seemed tough after December's disastrous election. I remember the first nationwide election 11 months into Paddy Ashdown's leadership. We scored less than 6%. But I also remember how Paddy led our rebuilding by campaigning hard, by winning elections, council elections, by-elections. Remember the poll boost we got after the Richmond Park by-election? With 30 years of experience in our party, 20 years in Parliament, I know how to return us to winning ways. Back me to win. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the first question, Ed, will start with this one. In your vision of the party, what role do you think the Young Liberals have? Just that this is the Young Liberals as an essay, not just young people in general in the party, but specifically for the Young Liberals. Okay. You've got 2 minutes.
I think the Young Liberals have huge amounts to give to the party, and I want to give them all the opportunity to play an active role, whether it's on internal party committees, whether it's in campaigning, whether it's in policy debates at conference. We are at our strongest as a party, if you look back over our history, when the Young Liberals have been there championing new ideas, pushing the envelope out, and explaining what to many of us are the new issues which we hadn't confronted before. And I'm extremely keen, if I'm leader, to talk to the Young Liberals executive, and the whole Young Liberal membership to work out how together we can campaign. One of the things I've done as interim co-acting leader has been to develop something called the Policy Lab. The Policy Lab is a platform which you may know about, but the basic idea is it enables people from across the party, wherever they are, to have a voice in debating policy, to have a technical platform where people can come together and debate and share ideas, share good practice, share campaigning ideas. And that is an example of how I've already opened up to the wider party membership. And I think this is a very strong sign to Young Liberals that I'll be a party leader who wants to involve members more from all levels. But I do think Young Liberals have a particular part to play, and I'm very keen to work with you.
Thank you. Layla?
Well, I think Young Liberals needs to have a prominent role. It's absolutely right that there is a prominent role that they play on board and also the steering committee. I was delighted when that was announced. I also think that we need to make sure that Young Liberal motions are actually debated at conference. I have had this conversation. In fact, I remember when I was first elected in 2012, one of the first conferences I did was to go to Activate and to speak to Young Liberals there who were saying the same thing. Why don't our motions get to conference? And I would like to see, and it's not my gift, it has to be something that we get conference committee to do, but actually a slot reserved for Young Liberal motions, which they're open to. But it also means that we need mentoring and training, because their excuse is that the motions aren't, drafted right. And actually, you shouldn't be rejecting ideas because of drafting. This is the progressive wing of the party. These are the ideas that we need for the future. And if we are in a situation where essentially voices are being stifled, that's just not good enough. So I also want to have someone in my office whose job it is to ensure that local parties and SAOs are listened to, and that will be a specific role in the leader's office. And my own view is that you guys should have a direct line in, and that the chair of Young Liberals is someone who's got my number, who is able to bring things to me. And in fact, this is the relationship that I've always had with Young Liberals, because actually that is the kind of leader that I want to be, a bottom-up leader, someone who encourages independent thought. When I did the Build Back Better book, I made sure that there was representation from Young Liberals in the chapters that were written. It's really important to me that Young Liberal voices are heard in this party. And the reason why is because you guys have some of the best ideas.
Thank you. So following on a similar theme of young people, lots of young people don't feel particularly welcome in local parties, or feel they're just sort of lumped with the young people jobs, like in charge of social media, delivering leaflets. You're young, you can go, you can walk, off you go. What would you do to support young people, and also just change this culture in general, that actually, young people are there not just as sort of the foot soldiers, but to actually go out and be really influential in the party? Sorry, yeah, this one's Layla first.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, yes, I've noticed it too. And when I first joined the party, I was in my mid-20s, 27 at the time, and I noticed that as well. It was like, here's a bunch of leaflets. You've got legs that go faster. Here, you do it. And hello, there is so much more to any young person than that. And in Oxford, Western Abingdon, actually, that is something we've taken very seriously. We always make sure that we've got as good a connection as we can with Oxford University Liberal Democrats. That includes Brooks as well. And we encourage them to stand for executive. We always have them as part, and they've got a standing invitation to our campaign team meetings. And actually, some of the core people in my own leadership campaign are members of Young Liberals, because actually they're the best people. And it's not just on social media that they're involved in strategy, they're involved in data crunching. It's really, really important that we are using every sinew that we have, all the talent that we have in the party. And I've always felt that age is but a number. When you go to local parties for the first time, we, yes, have local parties that tend to be, perhaps of a certain age. We know this. We need to reduce the age of people who are getting interested in politics. It's a problem throughout the country. Lib Dems are meant to be better, but nevertheless, I'm considered young for a Lib Dem. And so, yeah, I can absolutely understand how in places that haven't got that progressive approach, who, just see a young person and think, right, there you go, you sit in the corner and they're there, I'm going to tell you how I used to do it, and that's the best way to do it. That's the culture that we need to challenge, because actually it's not just Young Liberals, it's new blood in the party in general. Very often feels like there's an old guard, we did this a different way before, just wait a few years and you'll understand why it's done this way. Let's change that culture. And that experience is important, but actually the new ideas are equally important. And it's when you've got respect for the two that's when great things can happen. So yes, there is a culture change that's needed in the party to be more welcoming for young people. But also the last thing I'll say is I really want to hear from you guys as to the best thing that we can also be actively promoting in local parties to do that. And as yet, I haven't seen that particular topic come up, and I really want to ask you.
Sorry, could you please draw your mics for close?
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, and then the same question, Fred.
I'd start by wanting to know what improvements you want. Young Liberals no doubt would have views, and we could survey their own members, survey young members of the party about what is the changes that you would like to see. I can speak from my own constituency. We do have a vibrant lot of young members in Kingston and Surbiton, and they have made a big impact in our party. 3 of our councillors are under 30, and well, we tend to have quite a lot of fun. One of the things I've always felt, if you're going to have good campaigning and be inclusive and welcoming, you need to have good socials, which are very, very inclusive of all age groups and of all different backgrounds. And we put a real emphasis on having socials, including ones that can be afforded. And when we've had expensive ones, I've made a real effort to make sure that young people, young activists, get tickets donated free. So we've often had tables at quite expensive dues where they've been all young people and they've all had the tickets paid for them by me getting sponsors for them. So we can make sure we're as inclusive as possible and trying to get down those barriers that would otherwise prevent young people being really involved. And I think that financial point is worth focusing in on. A lot of young candidates can find it very financially difficult to run. And we need to reflect that and find ways to support them, whether it's through bursaries or through, if it's a council ward, other wards supporting them. We need to make sure the training and recruitment is there to help young people get the confidence that they need to go and stand for council or indeed for parliament. And we need to think about where the young people are coming into the party. So, for example, a big group of youngsters coming into the party who are providing fantastic roles are our campaign organisers, are people who work for MPs, people who work for council groups. They are overwhelmingly young, and we need to try to value the role they play far more, try to create a clear career progression in the party so that they feel that they're not only welcome and playing a role early on, but they can see a future. I've just seen too many local parties where young people have turned up, not been welcome,
please,
and then they're gone. So we really need to change the culture.
Thank you. So sort of just building on from that, so what have you done to engage young people in your leadership campaign specifically? Ed first.
Well, we've got quite a lot of young people on my team. For example, we've got helping me prepare for tonight 2 or 3 young people who really are actually members of Young Liberals. And so having people on the team is critical. Trying to get issues out that are important. I mean, my core message in this leadership election is a greener economy, a fairer society, and a more caring country. And when I look at the issues that Young Liberals have taken up, housing, mental health, the universal basic income, they are all issues that are in my platform. And indeed, I think I've got particular perspectives on them, which will really help them actually happen. So universal basic income, I've worked out how you could pay for it. I've got a real 30-year background in that policy area, which I know is a big issue for Young Liberals. On housing, I've supported social and affordable housing in my constituency, and I've got some ideas about how we can reform the planning system, again, speaking to the issues of the Young Liberals. And finally, on caring, which is a very big part of my agenda, as you have seen, that really links into the mental health agenda of the Young Liberals. This is absolutely fundamental when we talk about caring. It's not just about care for the elderly, it's care for people with physical disabilities, mental health problems, with special needs, people who've been bereaved, a whole range of different people who need to be cared better. And the people who are looking after them need to be supported better too. So I think the issues that I focus speak to the Young Liberals agenda, as well as people of my team coming from the Young Liberal tradition.
Wonderful. And Layla?
Well, I was doing a quick tally, and I would estimate that of sort of my core team, about half are under 30. And in terms of the wider team, it's really hard to say, but I think it's probably about the same. And what I've just been really stunned by is, on the one hand, I know a lot of guys, and the reason why they're on my team is because they're really fantastic. And what I wanted was a really positive, energetic campaign. It was really forward facing, that was looking at the future and not the past. And I think that also really resonated with a lot of people, which is why they came on board. But as we've then developed things like, my vision for the country, my vision for the party, they have been there front and center every step of the way. And that's, to me, exactly the relationship that I want to have as leader with young liberals and young people going forward. We have to make sure that actually the best thing that we can do is create policy that is the right policy for not just the next election, but actually the next generation. And that's what in my opening statement, when I said I wanted to build things that outlast me, that is the approach that I want to take as leader of this party. And that means that we need to be building policy that is right, thinking about the next 10 years, the next 20 years. I've suggested that, for example, in local councils, and this is what we're trying to set up here in the Vale of Whitehorse District Council, that we have a citizens' assembly, but that it is primarily made up of young people. When I've spoken about going carbon negative, not just carbon neutral, that was off the back of conversations I'd had with young people who said, come on, you just don't seem to get the urgency of this. And you have to find a way of framing it in a way that encapsulates that urgency. So I've also talked about how we need to win back the young vote. And when I said being more radical than Labour, actually it was young people that I was talking about attracting, because a lot of young people who might have voted for Labour over the last few years, in my view, were always liberals. And I think back to when I was younger, I didn't really know what liberalism was. I wasn't really that political. I was more interested in other things and getting on with my career and starting my life. And it wasn't until I was later, older, that I recognized that actually those progressive ideas based on equality,
yes. Sorry,
future focused,
time.
that's liberalism.
Thank you. So the next question sort of takes a little bit of a slightly different stance. This is a trigger warning for racism with this one. I'm going to ask it in two halves. So the recent Black Lives Matter movement has reminded us all how entrenched racism is in our society, both in the UK and abroad. So the first part of the question is, what do you propose we do as a party to tackle this? And that's looking internally, what we can do as an organisation, what you can do as leader to improve that situation within the Liberal Democrats themselves. So for that first half, if Layla can go first.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement has just exposed what we kind of already knew, but I think I take personal shame in the fact that our own party also reflects some of those entrenched views in wider society. And I think to colleagues of mine, candidates who I've mentored, who went into selections and were told, well, this part of the country just will never elect a Black MP. So that's why they didn't make it through to the final round of selection. And it just goes to show that even in our own membership, and I have to say some of this myself, I'm albeit half Palestinian, and people they make prejudiced assumptions about people based on things they didn't choose. And that's the problem with it, is that even in our own party, this happens, and it needs challenging, and we need to realize it does happen. And that's step one. And step two is then, how do you change it? So first of all, the older DICE review needs fully implementing. The thing that was in there that is the hardest thing to change is the culture of the party. And that actually is where I think the leader can have the biggest impact, because it's about vision, it's about ethos, and it's about the tone that you set. But I also want to set a specific challenge to local parties. And the question is this, it's very simple. Are you representative of the communities that you want to represent? And what I mean by that is, if you are, a local party in inner city London, where you've got a constituency that is over half from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds, why is it that your campaign team is all white? Surely just look around the table and realize that, one token Black person is not enough. That is not meeting that criteria. And I think we need to start measuring it. We also need to roll out unconscious bias training, really resource this. I've spoken about introducing a Rooney rule so that in selections, you have a certain number of places that are reserved for Black, Asian, minority ethnic candidates. There is so much that we can and should be doing. And I do think that making this a relentless focus in my first year of leadership, at least until it's solved, will be a really important part of what I have to offer as leader.
Wonderful, thank you. And Ed?
Well, frankly, our party has a dreadful record. It is shameful. And the top priority for me as leader is to put this right. We've had plenty of reports. We had a report from Navneet Dalakia in 2004. We had a report in 2007-8 from Izan Ghazni. Now we had the Older Dice report published in January 2018. The General Election Review said we need to implement it. I'm fed up of talk. I want action, and I will lead that action from day one. And I will lead it using what I've done in my own constituency. I have a very diverse constituency. We have lots of Tamils from Sri Lanka. We have Gujaratis. We have a big Sikh population, mainly from East Africa and actually from Afghanistan. We have a big Muslim population, mainly from Pakistan, but also from Bangladesh, Iraq, Iran, and Syria. And we have one of the largest Korean populations in Europe. And so over 20 years, I've engaged with these communities in their places of worship, in their places of fun, in the schools for their children. And by engaging, reaching out, not waiting for them to come to me, but reaching out to them, I've managed to persuade, but I've built trust, I've built relationships, I've helped them. And through that work, many have joined our party. And I'm very proud that my local party, because of that reach out, is far more representative of our local community than almost any other party in Britain today. We have 8 of our 38 councillors are from Black, Asian, or minority ethnic backgrounds. So that has taught me that you have to reach out. But we as a party have been particularly bad with the Black community. So one of my core messages will be, let's reach out to the Black community where they are. And the figures suggest a lot of the Black community meet in churches. Now that may not be comfortable for some people, but if you're going to be serious about this, if you're really going to want to change, you've got to go and meet people where they are, where they congregate, where they talk. And that would be something that I would want to do. And I wanted to make sure the party is far more welcoming, understands there is, yes, unconscious bias training, but far more. The Rooney Rule, yes, on shortlists, but I think we should be pushing for all Black, Asian, minority ethnic shortlists. That's going to require a change in the law. We should be running that campaign, working with others to make sure the law is changed. And we should have funds to support Black candidates to make sure that our dreadful record is turned around and turned around fast.
Thank you. And then the second part of the question is, what can we do as a political force to make that change across, the culture countrywide? And then Ed.
Oh, there are so many things we have to do to tackle the injustices the Black community face. Let's start with the recommendations in public reports. The Lamy review in the criminal justice system that found structural racism had 35 specific recommendations. Let's get them implemented. The Angiolini review into deaths in police custody had 110 recommendations. Let's get them implemented. The Windrush review by the Home Office, chaired by Martin Ford, had 30 recommendations. Let's get them implemented. Baroness McGregor Smith's review into workplace discrimination had 26 recommendations. Let's get them implemented. And Boris Johnson has another review. Rubbish. Let's stop talking. Let's stop reviewing. Let's act. And one of the reasons why I, at my first PMQ, after we had the Black Lives Matter protests really come to everyone's notice, I asked about stop and search laws. Because whether it's a Lamy review or other analysis, the stop and search laws that the police use are racist. The ordinary stop and search laws, you're 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched if you're Black than if you're white. But the suspicionless stop and search laws, so-called section 60 stop and search, you're 47 times more likely to be stopped if you're Black than if you're white. Friends, we have to campaign on these issues. These are the issues that the Black community feels strongly about. We've got to take them up. We've got to be their champions. And unless we're taking up those issues, going out and meeting them, campaigning with them side by side, shoulder to shoulder, we're not going to either sort out the injustices that they face or be credible as their champions. I am determined, as I've already shown, that we shall be the champions on their biggest concerns. And that's one of the reasons why I chose Stop and Search, because I am told by Black friends that that is one of the biggest issues facing Black young people.
Thank you. And Layla?
Well, in terms of some of the issues that we need to continue to raise, I have pushed for FTSE 350 companies to ensure that at least 15% of their boards have a Black or Asian minority ethnic person on there. I've challenged companies who were built on the backs of slaves to donate money that they will, the equivalent amount of money that they would have had from it, to causes that will actually advance the cause. And that, by the way, that campaign was quite an interesting one, because the question, the nub of it is, how are we going to affect policy now? And that one worked because I teamed up with the Daily Telegraph to achieve it. And there's another way that we need to make sure that we're doing this, is that we are working cross-party. So when I challenged the government on the curriculum, ensuring that there is actually just honest representation of our own country's history, and not just in the history curriculum itself, but actually across the entire curriculum, to run a review on this. And I wrote a letter to Gavin Williamson. Nick Gibb replied, and he didn't really get it. But that letter that went actually had the signatures of cross-party MPs. And the general point here is that that is how we are going to get stuff done now, not in some sort of fictitious government of the future, now, because these things cannot wait. And it's not just on Black Lives Matter, it's on the green agenda, it's on coronavirus. I'm chairing the inquiry into coronavirus. There's an all-party group. We're meeting every week so that we can get to the bottom of what's gone wrong and what can be changed before a second wave. That collaborative approach that I take as leader is how we are going to get stuff done in Parliament and actually affect society from the position that we are in currently.
Wonderful, thank you. So the next question is sort of a potential trigger warning for transphobia and homophobia. As Lib Dems, we have excellent policies on LGB and especially T rights, well leading the way over the other parties. It's one of the reasons I'm particularly proud to call myself a Lib Dem. However, many LGBT+ members, and actually just members of the party in general, have been quite upset by some of the opinions expressed by Tim Farron. What will you do to ensure that these people know that the party continues to support them? Layla?
Thank you. Well, I too am really proud of our party, of our record in the party, of same-sex marriage, not equal marriage. We're not quite there yet. Same-sex marriage, and Lynn Featherstone pioneering that a few years ago. How we have not been split, and people have tried to split Ed and I on this issue and failed. I hope, Ed, you don't mind me telling this story, but when we had the LBC Hustings, there was a woman who called in who was trying to take us down on this. She utterly failed. And then we went off air and Ed and I did a virtual high five. Obviously we can't touch, but we did a virtual high five, because actually on these issues, there is nothing between us. And we have to continue to press on these progressive issues. And yes, there have been times in the party where people have said things or done things in the past that have been upsetting. I think in particular to when Philip Lee joined the party, and the LGBT community in the party actually wasn't really consulted. They'd felt really managed by the leader's office in that particular defection. And what I did after that point, and no one asked me, frankly, but I could just, so many who are in the party of LGBTQ+ are my friends. And so I went and I listened to them and I understood from them what it was that was causing the upset. And some of it was understanding what exactly was it that was causing the offense. And actually, in that particular case, the biggest issue that they had was that they weren't consulted, they weren't being heard. And that's where I think we need to improve as a party. And when I say I listen, I really listen. And when there are issues that come up, I think it's important that we talk it through, that we understand each other's point of view, and that we fix whatever it is that has come up. And it all starts with a conversation where we don't immediately jump to, this person's right or wrong, or I'm under attack or whatever. Actually, no, if you've said something that's offended someone, your job is to be humble enough to go, oh, maybe I've got this wrong. And that is one of the things that I think we need to change as a culture in our own party. Let's be a party that can have discussions around really difficult issues, and a party where if you've caused harm to someone, if you've offended someone, actually your first instinct is to apologize and work out what it is that you've done, and then maybe change. And I think the other side to this, and I spoke about unconscious bias training, but I think there's another type of training. It's called valuing everyone training. It's really important to understand intersectionality. It also is really important in understanding the different hierarchies of power that might be associated with, for example, sexual harassment. All of these things need addressing. And the best way to do them, in my first instinct, is always, let's talk it out. Let's make sure that the training is there first and foremost.
Wonderful, thank you. And Ed?
Well, you won't be surprised to know that I agree with Layla. You know, when we were on the LBC Hustings, we were told that if we said I agree with the other candidate, we get fined. And
yeah, we had to fine. Yeah,
fined a lot of money. And on this one, we were that you couldn't put a cigarette paper between us. Moreover, you know, I was quite cross with one of the callers, and indeed with Ian Dale, because he was addressing these issues to Layla as if, you know, she had to answer. And I was saying, well, hold on a minute, I have the same views. We're together on this. Why are you just asking Layla? So I think together, I think we should. I'm proud of Layla that we really put on a fight against people who were clearly transphobic. Friends, this is a critical issue. You know, trans hate crimes went up by 81% last year, and they're the ones just recorded by the police. You know, trans people face some of the worst discrimination of any people in our society. If we're not going to stand up for them, who is? You know, I think Keir Starmer has been spineless on this issue. We need to be vocal in our support of trans rights. We will not accept any backtracking on the Gender Recognition Act, for example. That's got to be really clear. And I think whoever wins, Layla or myself, you know, we will be very strong on this issue. You know, I often get briefed because I'm not going to say I'm an expert, but I get briefed by different people, and I'm very grateful to the work done by Helen Belcher, who's a trans woman who's been our candidate in Chippenham. And Helen has been an amazing campaigner. She's taken a lot of grief, and I'm so proud that she's in our party and a candidate in a key seat for us. And some of the things I've been talking with her about how we try to get the Gender Recognition Act back on the table again as the Tories sort of move away from it. I've been really impressed by the behind the scenes work that she's been doing, and how we, whether it's Layla, myself, or any of our MPs or peers, can assist that. And it's quite tricky work because the Tory party is having a massive debate about it. There are some people, let's be honest, in the Tory party who are on our side. The person who I point to mind is Penny Mordaunt. And we need to work cross-party to win on this issue.
Thank you. And I'm sure, like I say, everyone is really glad that there isn't a divide between you on those issues. It's very, very nice to know. Okay, so different starts for the next couple of questions. So the Liberal Democrats are very centred in the southeast, particularly at the moment. Both of you represent southern constituencies. The party and the Young Liberals have lots of members in the north. How do you propose the members in those areas don't feel left behind? Sorry, that's Ed first.
Well, it's a real worry I have at the moment. I think there's a real danger that our party is too focused on the southeast and London, too middle class, and frankly too inward looking. We need to make sure we are representing the whole of the country, the whole of our party, and we're speaking to the voters everywhere in the country. It's a critical issue for the party. It came over in the general election review. So one of the things we can do is actually something we've sort of not discovered, but it's become much more widespread during COVID, and that is Zoom. Zoom and indeed other video conferencing technologies, they are all available. They can bring the party together. So, you know, it should be a rule that no party committee or group should exclude anyone because they're not able to be there in person, that they should have the right to be able to attend on Zoom, both for financial reasons and frankly for other reasons, caring reasons, for example. So that is one way we can do it. But I also like to think that when we're debating at conference, we can make a special effort, because if we want as a party to be truly diverse, that is including diversity by income group, by wealth, and by where you live in the country, that's part of that diversity message. And therefore, it's absolutely a central part of how we're going to build that we are representing all regions and nations of our country. And I'm delighted I've got support in this campaign. We talk about young people in our campaigns. I've got support from all the regions. People are actively campaigning for me. And I've said to many of those people, look, I'm determined that whether it's winning a council ward in your area, whether it's winning a council, whether it's getting a target constituency, I'm determined that we will be backing you. We will be reaching out, because we have to be a party for the whole country, for everyone. Otherwise, we're not living our values, which is what we must do as a Liberal Party.
Thank you. And Layla?
Well, you're absolutely right. Our membership is concentrated in London and the South East, and making sure that we've got a broad enough vision that can be inspiring in every single part of the United Kingdom is what has obsessed me since the last election, because I was really worried. I am really worried after Brexit, you know, where are we going wrong? And what I did was I went door knocking. I went to Leeds, I went to Sheffield, I went to Kent, I went to Devon and Cornwall, I went to Wales, I was about to go to Scotland, and sadly coronavirus intervened. But the reason I did that was I went to go speak to voters. And in particular, I remember conversations that I was having with activists in northern constituencies, and in the listening sessions I've done with local parties since, this has come back loud and clear, is actually they are worried about the short-term tactics of being absolutely focused on just winning over Tory voters in London and the South East at the next general election. And that's why I've developed a broad message that is also popular in Labour-facing areas too. The same Labour-facing areas where, you know, you've got councils who are absolutely letting down their local communities. And if we need to take the fight to Labour in those areas, we should. And in fact, in some places, we're doing an incredible job. We're winning seats in parts of the country that we shouldn't. And it very often actually is ideas from younger councillors that are helping us to do that. I first came across and actively supported UBI because of a young councillor called Jack Haynes in Hull. And it was him who brought this to me and said, you know, can you do something in Parliament around this? Because we're about to put a motion to the council. And actually, they have really made waves. And, you know, he's really promoted it since then. I've supported him in doing that. So actually listening to younger members in the North, this is what I meant about harnessing the best ideas, making sure that we're championing the voices of our younger activists. It's exactly what I did before, and it's what I will continue to do as leader.
Wonderful, thank you. So if you're elected leader, what do you think the press or other parties are likely to attack you on, and how do you plan to counter it? That's Layla first.
Thank you. So they'll always find something. They will find something in every Liberal leader. They don't like us, particularly when we're starting to go after seats and when we are going to be credible again. And that's really, really important, is that we are credible again. That comes off the back of winning council seats first. We're going to build up from the bottom up. And by the time we get to the next election, we will have this campaigning force that we are going to be credible in seats where we are in second place and take them. And where I have seen criticism is a suggestion that because, for example, I am pansexual, that's going to be a problem in those Tory-facing seats. And I've really disliked that narrative. And in fact, whether it's that, whether it's my obesity that I dealt with when I was younger, my mental health, the issue with my ex, every time a question like this has come up, I've taken the approach that actually the best way of dealing with what is perceived to be a negative is to actually just answer the question. And it was one of the things that drove me insane when I was not that interested in politics. I would look across at politicians, they'd have a difficult answer and the question, and they wouldn't actually answer it. They'd sort of dodge around it. And especially if it was to do with their personal life. So I've taken the opposite approach. I've been out and proud about all aspects of my life and myself, and I've explained my journey. And in this campaign, when any of those things have come up, there have been points of interest, but actually what I then do is I use them to talk about why we need better mental health services, why Boris Johnson's obesity strategy, I don't think fundamentally is going to work because it doesn't treat people as if they are people, is treating them as if they're statistics. That's the way that you turn negatives into positives, is that you take something that's seen as a negative and then you use it as a way of talking about really credible issues that matter to other people. And I'm delighted to say that most of the time, and certainly in Oxford Western Abingdon, when things like my sexuality or whatever have come up, most people just don't care. And that's the best bit of it. Most people, even though I was being pursued by the press about it, just said, do you know what? It's no one's business. Actually, I know you're a good MP and I'm going to vote for you. And that was the nicest thing that I'd ever heard.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Ed?
And Lady would get all our support if the right-wing press attacked her, because I think she's been very brave. For me, it'll be about the coalition, I'm sure. Just as they went for Joe, they'll probably come for me. I treated it quite differently from the way Joe did, though, because I'd want to pivot to talk about the future and talk about the fact that we're credible because of what we actually achieved. Now, first of all, they probably come about some of the votes we had to do because of the Tories. And I think we should, be clear that all governments make mistakes, and we should empathise with anybody who suffered and show that we've got now the policies for the future where we will put that right, and we will really be a party of a fair society, promoting social justice, against austerity and so on. And I think we can do that. But I'd also use my own record in government, which I'm proud of, particularly on energy and climate change, because I fought the Tories and won. They didn't like me. I wear that as a badge of pride, and I beat them time and time again. That's why we managed to nearly quadruple renewable power, why we became the world leader in offshore wind, why I negotiated at Europe and the United Nations on really ambitious climate change targets, which fed into the UN Paris Climate Treaty. We as a party, because we did that, we as a party be very, very proud. And I would use those achievements to say, and look what we can do in the future, because we have the best record on climate change. You can believe us that we'll deliver this massive green economic recovery plan that I'm talking about. And therefore, the key thing when they're attacking you is to turn it into a positive. And that's what I do by showing what I achieved and how that relates to our future program when we get to the 2024 election.
Wonderful. Thank you. So if you could take a policy from another UK political party and have it as part of our manifesto, what would it be and why? And this is Ed first.
Oh, now that's a good question. A policy that we don't have that they have. It's very likely to be from the Labour Party, and it's very likely to be some aspect of immigration or welfare policy. I'm keen that we get to grips with universal credit, and Labour have done some thinking on that. Universal credit has been a total disaster, and some of the issues around it are clear design faults. Now, ultimately, I want to replace the universal credit with a universal basic income, and then obviously changing to the rest of the system. But you couldn't do that overnight, and therefore making sure universal credit wasn't as pernicious as it is at the moment, with the many flaws I see in my constituency surgeries. I do advice surgeries for my constituents, and so I've been doing that for 20 years. So you've seen different aspects of the welfare system come and go, and some of their problems. And universal credit's got a lot of problems. And so I think working and trying to steal some of Labour's good ideas on reforming universal credit is probably where I go first.
Cool. Thank you. And Layla?
Well, I've had longer to think about this than Ed, and I still am struggling because actually I love our own policies. And the reason why I'm a Lib Dem is because I know that we create policies that are first of all rooted in our values, but also that are evidence-based and that work. When I joined the party, it was when I was doing a master's, it was in comparative education. I was a physics teacher before I was an MP. And I did a grid where I went on every single other party's, including our own website, and I looked at what education policy they were talking about, and I compared that to research, and I landed on the Lib Dems. And then when I discovered how we make policy in our party and how bottom up it is and how it's co-created by people who either do this for a living or we bring in experts, and the way that we do it, and yes, it needs to be even more inclusive, but hearing from other parties about how they create policy, they don't do it anywhere near as well as we do. So I'm really still struggling. The one thing maybe is, I do think the Greens have some quite sort of pithy ways of talking about the environment. And that's one of the things that I think we do need to learn from. Actually, our policy is better. It's more honest. You know, carbon zero by 2045 was always going to be difficult. When the Greens said carbon zero by 2030, they were actually lying, because they didn't include a lot of things in there. But that said, the framing of our policy is, I think, where we need the most work as a party. And what we need to do is to turn all these incredible policies and start with the voter and say to ourselves, actually, yes, this may be the answer, but if voters aren't asking that specific question, then how can we show them through these policies what it means to be a liberal? How can we start where they are and bring them on this journey with us? And that is now what I really think we need to be focusing on as a party, is understanding our voters, understanding how we're going to build back trust with swathes of the electorate that we've lost over the last 10 years, and how we're going to create that inspiring, forward-facing, bold, liberal vision that is going to be inspirational to them, but also get our activists out door knocking. That is now what we need to do.
Thank you. And what do you think the country's priority should be coming out of the COVID-19 crisis? And Leila, it's you first.
Well, I mean, this is huge. It's a huge question. And in fact, before the leadership election kicked off, and it was a project that was started when I heard that it was delayed for a year. And what I really wanted us to do as a party was to think deeply about what society could look like after this. So that's what Build Back Better is all about. The name itself is borrowed, frankly, from the United Nations. And they use it when they are talking about building back resilience into economies after natural disasters. But this is something that is planet-wide, and that is going to, I hope, change society for the better. But my concern right now is that actually it won't, because the Tories just don't get it. We're already hearing that they are considering going back to high levels of austerity. They aren't spending in the right areas. A green recovery is an absolute must, not just because we've only got 10 years left to literally save the planet, but also because it's the smart thing to do. Because if you pump green money into the economy, that helps to create jobs. It also encourages better education. It's a really important thing to do. And that's why environment is front and center with economy in the 3 pillars of my campaign. So I think that there is a better society that can be grown out of this crisis. We still have some way to go. And it's one that is more equal. It's one where we value those essential key workers that we would clap every Thursday. And what an incredible insult to them it has been that nurses aren't getting the pay rise that they deserve. We have to challenge the Tories at every turn to create that positive vision for what society could be after this crisis.
Really quickly, choose one, economy or environment. If you had the absolute top, which one would it be?
Environment.
Okay, and Ed, same question. Oh, the top priority question, not the end bit. Sorry.
Well, surprising enough, I want a fairer, greener, more caring country post-COVID. And let's start with a fair economy, because I think people have been really stirred about the inequality that they didn't even realize was there. And you know, it's clearly in homelessness. You know, 135,000 children were homeless last Christmas. And the homelessness that we managed to achieve, getting people off the streets, giving them homes during the COVID, surely we can't go back to allowing those people to go onto the streets again. So, you know, we need to have a revolution on housing to tackle that homelessness. And whether it's the council house revolution I've been talking about, whether it's the UBI we've both been talking about, we need to make sure that post-COVID we have a fairer society. But you're going to partly do that, and you can't completely disentangle these things, by getting the green jobs revolution that I've talked about. And if you're going to make sure people don't have jobs, can afford homes, and can look to the future, combining the economic challenge with the climate change challenge seems to me perfect sense. It's why I've talked about a green economic recovery plan, so we can get those green jobs. I've done it in the past. I know we can do it now. So that fairer, greener society and economy is what I'd be looking for. And I'm afraid I want to bring in caring as well, because surely people have learned now that you can't have a better NHS unless you have a better caring sector and you invest in social care. Johnson said, protect the NHS, and he forgot social care. What a disgrace! What a disgrace! I think they have been criminally negligent in the way they failed to look after our care homes, the way they failed to look after our care workers. And it's one of the reasons I've been so keen to push for that inquiry and won that commitment from the Prime Minister at the dispatch box in Prime Minister questions to have a future inquiry. Now we need it as soon as possible. We need to get to the bottom of the mistakes that we made, because frankly, if we have that inquiry, we can use it to build that post-COVID society where caring is valued far more.
So, same follow-up question. I know your policies are very intertwined. With green and the environment, with the economy. But if you had to choose the environment, the economy, or the care sector, which would be just one?
Well, I hate these sort of questions. I think in the very short term, it's homelessness. Okay. We can't allow people in the short term to go back to street. But in the medium and long term, it's going to be climate. Otherwise, there'll be no planet, there'll be no future.
Wonderful, thank you. Now the Young Liberals question everyone's been waiting for. Housing is a major policy issue for the Young Liberals. Do you believe that the planning system needs reform, including reform of the Green Belt? And this is Ed first.
I absolutely do. And the real challenge has been how you do that. Because when you think of it, and it's not just the Green Belt, there's lots of aspects of the planning system that need to be looked at. And I thought long and hard about this, because the fundamental problem, and Liberal Democrats are as bad as any other party on this, let's be frank, is there's a real tendency for what we call NIMBYs, not in my backyard. And the policy challenge to sort that out is not just also have massive arguments, because you're not going to win. You need clever policies which can turn NIMBYs into IMBYs. So people actually want development in their community. And I've seen two big policy proposals over the years, one which our party has debated, one which they haven't, that I think really speak to that need to move NIMBYs to IMBYs that could really build those houses at a pace that we've not seen before. The first was a policy paper that we debated at conference, and it had something called community land auctions. And it was a way of the community getting the benefit, far more of the benefit, from the uplift in the value of land. Now, that might be greenbelt in some areas, but it could be lots of different land. When that planning permission is given, the value of the land becomes far higher. And at the moment, that gets creamed off, and the amounts that gets paid back to the community are much smaller than really they should be. So community land auctions, I thought, was a very exciting proposal, and I'd like us to debate proposals like that again. The other one that I've come across is what's called inquiry by design. And there are some developers who will look at, again, not just Greenbelt, but other areas, and they will say, let's plan this development not by coming forward with a plan and giving it to the people and saying, this is what you've got, but let's actually start with them. And so the local community help develop the plan, and then they feel more part of it. And then you see more homes being built. And, in my own constituency, we're seeing that sort of approach. And, we have, as a local council, I'm really proud to say, managed to give permission to development on brownfield sites, actually, of 950 homes. And we're pushing the developer to get those built. And we've got a strong record. And I know a lot about this because my wife is a councillor in charge of houses in Kingston.
Thank you. And Layla?
Thank you. So, first of all, we need to recognise that there is more than one housing crisis in this country. There's one in London, There's one then that sort of surrounds London, that sort of halo effect. Oxford very much falls within that. But when I talk to campaigners and indeed young people in parts of England, particularly the north, for example, where house prices are not that high, the bigger issue is opportunity. The fact that they feel that they need to move away from their communities, they need to move into the southeastern London in order to get, you know, on that first rung of the jobs ladder, and then that's where they settle, and then you end up with this vicious cycle. So it all starts with actually that macro level look at the country and recognizing that we need to create communities. We need to create a country where you don't have to move away in order to get an opportunity, where if you grow up somewhere, you have the affordable and social housing that you need with the infrastructure around it, so that it's a high quality of life. And that should be at the heart of the planning system, but at the moment it is not. So when you get councillors actually challenging developers and challenging plans, it's usually on that basis. And the reason why it happens is because it's not at all joined up. So I'll give you an example from here in Oxford West and Abingdon. So we've got actually 3 different district councils that I deal with in my area. Oxford City is one. And in their recent local plan, I argued for more houses, thousands of more houses to be built within the city confines. And instead of businesses that they wanted to put there, and the reason they wanted to put business there is because it gives them business rates, and it was all part of their model. But what they were not thinking about is the fact that if they put all the businesses there and then they put all the homes, you know, about an hour's commute away, can be longer on the congested roads of Oxford, and there isn't the train lines, and the inter-county connectivity isn't the best, and it could be better, then what you end up with is a situation where people have low quality of life. So what I've always suggested is that we think about the community first. And 2 green belts, and yes, I know that there are young liberals who think that I don't ever want to build on the green belt. Actually, that's not true. And I would invite you to look at literature that I put out in the past. What I've been saying is that we need a wholesale review of the green belt, and that piecemeal development is not the way to go.
Thank you. When organising campaigns for the Young Liberals, one of the key issues we face is sometimes the lack of communication and data from HQ. This, I know, is not just a problem that's experienced by the Young Liberals, but by other SAOs and even some local parties. As a leader, what will you do to ensure that YL and other SAOs are better integrated into our campaign infrastructure? And that's Layla first.
Thank you. So there's a lot of structural issues that we've got as a party, and it hasn't been working, basically. And when you have a situation where there are people who want to campaign and they can't because there's a blockage in the system, I mean, that's just emblematic of how, as a party, we have ended up in the position that we are. And I think the Thornhill Review talks about some of the changes that need making. Actually, there has been a slightly better working relationship between people at HQ and the regions and ALDC. And I would love to understand better what you mean by that, because we also clearly need to sort out an issue with SAOs. But what it comes down to ultimately is a change of culture in terms of the campaigning. And we saw this over the last couple of elections, the feeling that, you know, here come the feds, here comes HQ, and they are going to impose this campaign on you. They hold the rights to everything. We aren't that bottom-up party. We are not living our values in the way that we talk about in terms of, you know, localism and wanting to devolve power. And yet somehow we've ended up with a campaigning structure that is not bottom-up. So in my plan for the party that I've been speaking about in this leadership election, I talk a lot about training. And a lot of that training has diminished over the last 10 years. We need to bring that back. I mean, if we were a business, there is no way we'd invest as little in our activists and members as we do. And yet they are the driving force of this party. But we also need to have much better integration. And I don't think I specifically have the answer for this now. Actually, frankly, it's something that should be being driven by the president and the CEO. The Thornhill Review also talks about the 3-legged chair and the roles that different people play. So I think the role of the leader in this is to take away those concerns and then make sure that they're actioned and that it's not just all talk, that action actually then flows from that.
Wonderful, thank you. And Ed?
Yeah, I mean, Leila's right that this fundamentally isn't the day-to-day role of the leader. If you look at the general election review, it makes clear that, you know, we've got to have a clearer distinction between the roles. And if the leader is doing the roles that the CEO is supposed to do or the president is going to do, that's not fulfilling the general election review. And that's where we should start with, because let me reassure people who've had problems, because I do recognise the problem, right, and it's got to be cleared up. But I think the answer is in both the general election review itself and things that are happening around the general election review. So first of all, the general election review is really clear that we need much better training and communications between local and national parties, and that it's got to be more bottom up in the approach we adopt and not top down. And that, you know, it's sad that we have to learn that lesson again. We never used to be like it. We've done it wrong the last few years. And if we can go back to some of the ways we used to do things, I think that would help. But we've also got to use the technology that we didn't have in the past. And you may or not be aware, but as part of the implementation of the general election review and part of a program that's always ongoing, the federal board, now with the chief executive Mike Dixon taking it forward, is doing a complete review of the technology we use in the party to make sure we've got the best platforms for the next 10 years. And that's going to actually involve quite a bit of investment, but I'm really impressed by the way that Mark Pack, as president, the federal board, and indeed the chief executive is taking that one forward. And I wouldn't want to be in charge of the technology platform. You wouldn't want me to be in charge of the technology platform. Other issues to mention, which I think speak to this problem, is that we've had a change of personnel in LDHQ. We have a new director of research, strategy and communications, a lady called Mimi Turner. I haven't actually met her except on Zoom, and I think she's going to be a clean sweep, trying to sort out some of these problems that have not enabled people to get involved in campaigning. So it's work in progress, but I see real positive signs.
Cool. Thank you. So this evening, you both discussed the idea of a fairer society, which I think we can all get behind. I think we can also all agree that education is incredibly important, and the quality of primary and secondary education is vital to set up for children's success. Therefore, do you think that private and public schools, which do create a hierarchy of education based on the wealth of parents, are a good thing or fundamentally fair? And that's Ed first.
Well, there's a challenge here because while people rightly, and I certainly want equality of opportunity, where people don't have advantage based on their background, their wealth, and so on, I think we've also got to remember that we are a liberal party that believes in freedom. And I'm not sure if it would be a free country if the state prevented you from educating your child in the way that you wanted to do. And that's a real clash between some of our core principles, but I think the liberty argument has to come first. And so the challenge is, how do you make sure our public schools, our state schools, are the best they possibly can be? And that's absolutely more investment and other reforms as well. One reform I was involved in, which I'm very proud of, is the pupil premium, which gives more money to schools for individual children from more disadvantaged backgrounds. That is a way that Liberal Democrats have led to try to promote social mobility, to get towards that equality of opportunity that we so desire, that overcomes the distinction between private and public. So that's how I would want to do it. Better funding for state schools and looking at managed policies like we have in the past to try to make sure that you have a much more equal outcome. And my proposal in that would be massive investment in early years, preschool, reception and first year, where all the evidence shows you can make the biggest difference to a young person's life.
Wonderful, thank you. And Leila?
Yes, they are. Private schools are a problem. And I say this as someone who went to one. And when you study this, as I have, and this was what my master's was frankly all about. It's why I am in politics. It wasn't just private schools that was the problem. It was the whole idea that somehow if you create a market in education, that this was going to drive up standards. And when you look at anything in a system that introduces a level of segregation, and frankly, what are private schools? They are a way of segregating people depending on how much money your parents have. And actually, the reason why parents send their kids to private schools, the reason why I went to one, was because there wasn't the provision that I needed. For me, as it happens, we were living in Jamaica. We'd started our own school. I was the only one in my year group. I was being essentially homeschooled. I was homeschooling myself for about a year. And so I had to live here, and actually an independent boarding, I needed a boarding environment, and there just wasn't a state one that I could go to. So it was that for that reason. But the reason why it happened was because the provision wasn't there. And the same happens to families who very often are middle class, scrimp and save, and they feel that their local school is just not providing what they need for their child. And they find it in a private school. And what do they find? Well, very often they find that there is more choice for the child and that young person, that there's better special needs support, that those schools, because of the resourcing that they have, are able to do more and often give a more personalized education for that child that then allows them to flourish. Some schools, however, frankly, end up being subsidized by the state because they have charitable status, and they do very little for their surrounding communities. And actually the reform that I think is the fairest one to bring in is that we look again at the charitable status of private schools, and rather than have them automatically have it, that they need to earn it. And I've got examples in my own constituency of ones who frankly, sponsor the local girls football team and occasionally let them use their fields, but it's frankly when they're not really using them anyway, so it's no skin off their nose, to others who actually have created a learning support network across all schools in their own area, and they pump huge amounts of money and resource into improving the life chances of everyone in that town. There is a huge difference in what private schools do, and they need to be held to account for it.
Thank you. So now we're going to go on to a quick fire round, and this is going to be 30 seconds each. Should be yes, no, slightly supplementary sentence. Okay, so the first one will be for Ed. Well, both of you, but Ed will start. And how many non-white members do you have on your core campaign team?
About 2, but if the wider team, a lot more.
Okay, and Layla, same question.
2, and again, wider team more.
I will actually just supplement. How many members do you? I'll go to Ed first again. How many members do you have on your core team? Like how many? 2 out of?
I think it's about 12. I'd call this core team.
Yep. And same for Layla?
10, more or less.
10. Wonderful. Okay. Question 2. Name one thing in your leadership campaign that you have regretted. Oh, sorry, Layla first. Sorry.
Right. That I've regretted. There are various points where we've been pulled up for something. Certainly when we refreshed the website and didn't take over our cookie policy, that was just embarrassing. So I regret that I didn't ask for a second check there. But actually the returning officer, I think, has been really fair. And when things like that have come up, we apologize. We changed it within an hour and we moved on. So actually, I think it's an important lesson to learn for all of us. Check your cookies.
Thank you. And Ed?
Yeah, there was a data issue where we had got legal advice that we were doing the right thing and abiding by the law, and the returning officer disagreed. And I'm just, we should maybe have done some more checks, but we did some checks, but it turned out to be wrong. So I regret that.
Okay, wonderful. And Ed, what is your favourite biscuit?
Fig rolls.
Okay, and Layla?
Well, there's a Belgian one called Speculoos, but actually the other one that I love is Bourbons. So let's go with that.
Great, thank you. And which Liberal politician do you find most inspiring? They can be dead or alive. I will actually, for this question, I'm going to veto Paddy Ashdown and Charles Kennedy because that's everyone's answer. So you just think a little bit outside. But yeah, so Layla first.
So when we were asked this question for the Liberal History group, I chose Shirley Williams. And it was because actually there aren't that very many Liberal female politicians to look up to. And certainly when I first joined the party, I was looking for more of them. And then I read her biography, and she had this incredible way of marrying intellect with emotional intelligence that I really massively admire. So Shirley Williams.
Wonderful. And Ed?
Oh, this is tricky because, you know, I said Paddy Ashdown at the same thing that Leia's talking about. I'm a huge fan of Shirley, but let me try and say someone different. In terms of thinkers, it would be Beveridge. In terms of actual politicians, you know, I think Roy Jenkins was quite a character, even though he came from the Labour Party and the Social Democrats. He was the most liberal Home Secretary there's probably ever been. So he would be up there.
Oh, thank you. And the next one is, what is your greatest achievement? This can either be personal or political. And that's Ed first, sorry.
Oh, leading European-wide negotiations on climate change targets, where I was the bunny hugger of the European Council, trying to get far more ambitious targets. I hoodwinked the Tories. They thought that I wouldn't get them, and they said that I wouldn't get them, and I got them. And that was through 2.5 years of what I call climate diplomacy. So that then fed into the Paris Treaty on Climate. So there's no doubt that those international negotiations on climate were the things that I think about the most.
Wonderful. And Leila?
I think it was after, there's loads that come to mind, but the one that I really feel like I helped to make a real difference was when we had those Fridays for Future strikes. And I promised young people in my constituency that I would do something. And so I called the first debate on the floor of the House on climate change in 2.5 years. And some of you might remember that moment because that was all over the papers. Where is everybody? It really sparked people taking notice of this issue. And then later on, we worked cross-party to get Greta Thunberg to Parliament. And that was an amazing time to actually help to drive the narrative in an area that I'm so passionate about. Oh, Murphy.
Thank you. And this actually be the final questions. We're going to finish a little bit early, but what is...
Sorry.
That's all right. Was that a cat?
It is a cat. I'm so sorry. She's here.
That's right. She's welcome on screen.
She's very fluffy and very hot, and I've been letting her sleep in the room here with me. I'm so sorry, everybody. Carry on.
So Leila first. And what is one thing from the other person's campaign you would hope to continue to work on if you are successful over them? Sorry, that's you first, Leila.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that Ed's got incredible ideas when it comes to the green agenda. I really look forward to, come what may, working to include all of our ideas together. And obviously that's an area of great strength. So certainly the green agenda.
Wonderful. And Ed?
Yeah, I mean, there are parts of the agenda that Leila's put forward I think are really interesting. I think some of the ideas that were in the Build Back Better pamphlet were really, really good, and we should debate them. And I would welcome the chance to debate that and take that forward. Excellent.
Thank you. So you've now got time for a closing statement. I believe it's 2 minutes for the closing statements. So Ed first.
Thank you for all your questions, and thanks Jesse for chairing. I hope I've shown you I have the vision, experience and judgment to lead the Liberal Democrats. We should be proud to be the Liberal Party of Britain, fighting for freedom, for human rights, for civil liberties, for every person in our country. Proud to be the most pro-European party, the most internationalist party, championing cooperation between nations and people, leading the campaign for peace and climate change. Proud to be a party fighting for a fairer society, whether that's more housing and more affordable housing, or better care or better education. But we need to recognise that our liberal values and causes are now under sustained attack from the right and from the left. Nationalists, populists, people who want to divide other people. The challenge for liberalism has never been greater in my lifetime. And friends, I want to use my life experience, my political experience to fight back with you against the nationalists and populists. This will not be easy, given the challenges facing our own party. As the Thornhill Review showed, things aren't good, and there are no quick fixes. There never has been. But just as previous successful leaders of our party have done, I will start by laying firm foundations, winning campaigns in councils across the country, and next May, winning more seats in Scotland, Wales and London, building back brick by brick. And my plea to you is this: whether you back me in this leadership election or not, I will need you. Throughout our party's history, we have always been stronger when our young activists have been there at by-elections, at conference, at counts, getting elected themselves. And I know this, as a team, we can win. We have the ideas, the principles, and the passion. So please join the likes of Daisy Cooper, Manira Wilson, and Sarah Olney. Back me to be leader. Let's start winning again. Thank you.
Thank you. And Layla?
Well, thank you, Chessie, for chairing. Thank you, everyone, for your very entertaining questions. Thank you for suffering, Murphy. And if we're going to address the gaping gap between generations, then we have to take radical, liberal, and long-term action. We mentioned housing today, but we need to build homes that first-time buyers can actually get on the ladder with. We need to create jobs that work for everyone, where you're not going to be shut out if you're not wealthy living in London. We need to build a better, greener future for the planet that we call our home. And all of this should be underpinned by equality. We need a universal basic income to free people from the shackles of poverty. We need to purge our society structures of the prejudice baked in by those who built them. But steady as she goes isn't going to be enough to achieve that. If we want voters to look at us again, to see that we've moved on from the mistakes we've made in the past, then we need to show them that we've moved on. And under my leadership, we can. We can start winning again and provide hope that millions of young people so desperately need. We can give you the voice that you deserve as the future of our party and invest in you so that we can affect change at every level. And we need a leader who can inspire that hope that your generation has had snatched away from you. Vote for me, and I will champion a vision worth believing in again. It'll be a clean break from the decline of the last 10 years, and I will guide us into the future. I will help you build the party and society of tomorrow. So let's be the agents of change that our country and our party desperately needs. Let's fix the injustices that are holding back so much incredible potential. But more importantly, let's do it together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for your time. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for holding
Well
it.
done.
Very
Thanks,
well done,
everybody.
Thank you.